All right, guys, welcome to another stream. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Abby, who is a vegan doctor, who's with me today to discuss the C vaccines and shots, and just go back and forth with a lot of relevant questions that a lot of you guys have asked me, and that seems really prevalent in the mainstream public and also in the vegan community as well. So, first question for you, Abby, and thank you for joining us today.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and also your stance on the corona shots.
Sure. So I'm a vegan medical doctor. I joined the plant-based movement several years ago. And in terms of my stance on the coronavirus shots or vaccines, as I would call them, I am overwhelmingly in favor of them. I think it's one of the most amazing feats of technology that we are able to, in the amount of time that we're able to do it, get such a technology out in the face of the global pandemic. And I encourage people to utilize such technology so that we can get back to normal in various parts of the world. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. So the first question, I guess, for me is more of a vegan related one. And I remember being sent a clip and I watched the interview. I think it was a panel with you and other vegan doctors for the COVID vaccine. And I think you mentioned in the stream how, in your opinion, the vaccines can be considered vegan, or vegans should consider taking it because the animals tested on were less sentience, I believe you made the argument for. And also,
so just to let me just interrupt you right there, John. So
sure.
the argument wasn't over. So here was the argument. It wasn't just that the animals were less sentient, so it's okay. The argument was that first and foremost, there's no additional demand that's created by you taking the vaccine because the testing was already done. Whereas if you didn't take the vaccine, it leaves open a pool of unvaccinated individuals that other pharmaceutical companies are going to look at. And they're going to see, oh, there's this proportion of individuals that aren't vaccinated. Let's try to get our FDA approval. And when they do that, guess what? That actually means more testing, right? So a very plausible argument could make, not only does it not create demand for more animal testing, but if you don't get vaccinated, if a whole bunch of people don't get vaccinated, it may actually create incentives for more animal testing paradoxically to actually occur. That was point number one. Point number two, so that's the first point. The second point that I made in terms of the lower sentience was that even if that point doesn't go through, which it does, but even if that point doesn't go through, the second point wasn't even the sentience point, it was just the numbers. Even if you just consider all life to be of equal value, you're talking about testing on the amount of lives you're talking about testing on, comparing the amount of lives you're talking about saving. The proportions are just astronomically imbalanced. And so even if point number one somehow didn't go through, point number two would go through, which is just the absolute numbers. And then point number three is if you consider the sentience, it would be even more than that. So what I'm doing is I'm making an overdetermination. So just like someone charges someone for murder and theft and everything to get them in jail no matter what, the point I'm bringing here is that regardless of what argument you're going with, there's another argument that's on the way. So it's funny because a lot of people just heard the sentience part and that's what they picked out of that segment. And it's really weird that like they just completely forgot everything I said before.
Sure.
And so for everyone listening, even if you don't consider sentience differentials to be relevant, the argument, that's not even the main argument. The main argument is that you could very well be causing more animal testing by not getting the vaccine than by getting it.
Right. Well, that's considering the idea that animal testing phase is necessary, right? Which I think a lot of vegans are arguing against.
No, it's not. So here's the thing. Even if it's not necessary, it's necessary to get into the market. It's not necessary. Okay. Well, the word necessary
it could be an alternative way of getting into market, so to speak.
Well, not the markets that they're trying to make profits off of. You're talking about the U.S. market. I can tell you right now, you're not going to get into it without animal testing. Unfortunately, and I want to repeat, it's unfortunate. Sucks that it's like that. But the way pharmaceutical industries by and large work is they want to get into profitable markets. That's just the name of the game. And the most profitable markets are right now USA. That's where you end up making the most bang for your buck. I can tell you the FDA will never approve a vaccine without, or any pharmaceutical, virtually any pharmaceutical for that matter, without some form of animal testing. And so is it necessary from a scientific perspective, John? No, it's not. Is it necessary to get into the market for the FDA to approve it? Yes, for that market it is. And that's why the argument goes through. It's because you could very well just incentivize another company to see that unvaccinated population and want to reap those rewards.
Sure. And as a vegan, I don't know if you consider yourself a vegan or not, but as a vegan,
I do.
Okay, for ethical reasons, I'm assuming. You're talking a lot about numbers, how one animal sacrifice would save around 7,000 people or something like that, right? And
it's an underestimate, by the way. Yeah, see, it's even more than that.
Sure. Yeah. But let's assume, the tables turn and we had a situation where, in order to save, 7,000 animals, 150 humans had to die and be tested on. How would you see that as opposed to what you're saying with your argument?
Yeah, so at some threshold, the answer would be yes. I don't know if the threshold might not exactly be the same because I do consider a sentience differential to be part of it. So the numbers may have to scale up more. But to answer your question, yes, I would take a consistent approach. In principle, at some level, at some threshold differential level, I would say yes to that question as well.
So just a general question, like in general, just so I have an idea where you stand, in terms of the industry in general, do you personally believe that there is, corruption and industrial influence, political influence that leads to conflicts of interest when it comes to these particular shots, in relation to organizations that are recommending and pushing the shots, such as the NIH, FDA, CDC, and WHO, for example?
I haven't been aware of any evidence of corruption in NIH, CDC, and those organizations. If you're asking me with respect to the pharmaceutical industries themselves, look, there's always going to be motivations to make profit. If you're talking about corruption, I'm not sure what you mean. If you mean something other than motivations to make profit, you're talking about like lying and stuff like that. Yeah. What I can tell you is that, so I haven't been aware of any evidence that there were any overt lies, but what I can tell you is pharmaceutical companies are no different than any other company. Their goal is to make a profit. That doesn't mean that the thing they're selling is a bad thing, though. Like an air conditioning company's goal is to make a profit too, but in the hot summer, it's still a very good thing to have an air conditioning and to cool your house. A farmer's goal is to make a profit. You can buy their food. It's not a bad thing. Just because someone's goal is to make a profit doesn't mean that they're selling something that's bad. That should just be judged by the data.
Well, that's the overarching kind of idea that, if there is a financial incentive, if there are conflicts of interest, the data can then be manipulated in favor of the interest, right? And so the data is amazing. I'm super pro science. I love science, but there's always some influence that is always a motivation behind something. And as you probably have seen in the news, even Tony Fauci's email leaks it wasn't even a leak, it was just a release, does bring a lot of questions to the table when it comes to the CDC and the NIH and also WHO and these things regarding many things that we can discuss, but there are many.
Well, just before we get to that, so I just want to give you a picture of what would happen in terms of the randomized controlled trial data being suspect. The degree of conspiracy that would have to happen is astronomical, and I'll tell you why. Because these were multi-center international trials with numerous different hospitals and numerous different both inpatient and outpatient centers collecting patients and collecting data. And the data goes to the sponsor through those different sites. Now, for that data to be fabricated to the degree that it would change things measurably, you would have to have a conspiracy involving many different sites, all coordinated with each other, changing the data in such a way. Also, you would have to have all the ecological data that came afterwards, all the retrospective data for different hospitals, to somehow also be in cahoots with them to match that data. Because guess what? It's not just the randomized controlled trial that showed these things. It's also the observations of other independent organizations that have done population studies in various different countries that have found the same thing. So you would have to be an international, multi-center, both intra and international conspiracy. And you would have to have it done for various different pharmaceutical companies, all doing in both intra and international conspiracy for that to happen. Mm-hmm. That's what, just to, it's not just an organization having some corruption. Like, you would have to have like one of the greatest conspiracy theories in the history of mankind for this to work.
Yeah, for sure. And you're talking specifically about which trials are you talking about now? Like the ongoing human trials?
So I'm talking about the Pfizer phase 3 randomized controlled trial. Mm-hmm. I'm talking also about the Moderna phase 3 randomized controlled trial. I'm also talking about the non-trial data, which is the observational data that's been done in various different countries as well, including countries that are not part of the West.
Right.
Right.
And so which markers and which what was controlled for in the human trials that you're talking about that shows the safety and efficiency of the injection?
Sure. So it's a randomized controlled trial. So they gave the placebo to a group of individuals, and then they gave the real vaccine to a group of individuals. If the actual numbers, so in Pfizer specifically, it was 21,000 apiece. So 21,000 individuals received a placebo injection, and 21,000 individuals approximately received the actual vaccine. And then they were followed over time.
Do you know how long?
I see the data here going up to 119 days. There's been longer term follow-up data after that. What I can tell you is that I can do it with my hands. Over that amount of time, if you look at the divergence between how many people are getting COVID and not, it just goes like this. To a great degree, it's a point where it's 20 times more likely for someone to get COVID if they don't get the vaccine compared to getting the vaccine. It's not even close.
Right. And the placebo group was also studied for the equal length of time to the control group?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah. So there wasn't an unblinding process of the placebo group?
Not during the duration that I'm talking about. Eventually, when there was EUA, when there was an emergency use authorization, that placebo group, they're allowed. You can't tell people hey, listen, everyone's getting authorized to get this vaccine for emergency use. You're not allowed to, though. Mm-hmm. Then it becomes unethical, because once you've demonstrated how good it is and how safe it is, it's to prohibit someone from getting the vaccine at that point in time. It wouldn't be ethical. So most people in the placebo group ended up choosing to get it. However, what we do have is we have the data prior to the EUA. We have the data from before there was emergency use authorization, and we can follow the placebo group and the vaccine group over that time, where the time is equal, and we can see what happens to both of them when there is no crossover, and it's very clear.
And how do these trials measure the efficiency or efficacy? What are the metrics used?
So the metrics of measuring efficacy is based on how many cases of COVID of symptomatic COVID that has been observed in the placebo group and the control group. So they do it by events. So they have the ends are the number of people in the study. Those are equal in the placebo group and the vaccine group.
Right.
And the events per group are events of symptomatic COVID. Now, some trials break it down further in terms of severe COVID, like events that will lead you to hospitalization. Some will break it down to like mild, moderate COVID. In any case, they all show the same thing.
Mhm.
For all these different categories, it's a much, much stronger chance that you will get hospitalized for COVID or develop symptomatic COVID if you do not get the vaccine than if you get the vaccine.
Mhm. Right, and that is shown through a PCR test to show the events, right?
That's shown through either so it could be PCR. I'm not sure if all of them are PCR. Some may be rapid antigen tests, but I believe at this time frame, rapid antigen tests weren't as popular. So I believe this would be PCR.
Okay.
In the majority of cases, yeah.
Okay. And hopefully they use the same cycle threshold for everyone across the board.
Sure. Yes, but even if they don't, here's the thing: even if there was variability of cycle threshold, the degree of difference that you would have in order to make these results different, you would have to have a systematic bias that would be so great that it would basically require a inter and international conspiracy.
Right.
Like I can't stress enough how. Okay, so remember, like we talk about relative risks, John. We talk about relative risks of like 1.3, 1.6, 2 point something.
Mhm.
You know, some people like to say you need a relative risk of 2 or over for it to be meaningful. You know, all those memes.
Yeah.
This relative risk came out to be 20 something, right? 20 something higher fold increased risk of getting COVID if you don't get the vaccine. Now, in order for that magnitude, in order for that to be affected by a cycle threshold difference, you would basically have to have a mass conspiracy. Like there would have to be something. So I can't stress enough. Like we don't see, and by the way, we only see these kind of efficacies really so far through this new technology. If you look at the other vaccines that just use antigen adjuvant technologies, they get efficacy of 70, 80%, not 95, not 90, 95. So this new technology, it's actually really amazing in terms of how well it works. To be able to take that magnitude of treatment effect of prophylactic effect, and to have it and to argue that there was some systematic bias, you would have to have such a great degree of an imbalance there. And again, that's why we randomize patients. The patients need to be, that's why we randomize in the site. So even if one site does a different cycle threshold, they have different cycle thresholds for both the control group and the vaccine group in the same site. So that those biases are going to balance out. That's why we randomize people.
Right. And as you mentioned, the injection was made like very hastily. Not that impacts the quality or anything like that, but it was emergency authorized, not approved, right? In your opinion, we don't need the longer term data to prove its efficacy or safety of these particular drugs, right?
At this point, I don't think so, but there will be anyway. There will be, so they are still going to follow, and they still are following people who have the vaccine, various vaccines, and they are monitoring adverse events. But it's always, here's the thing, John, it's always a risk reward analysis, right? So you always have to ask so there's always going to be a risk of a certain pharmaceutical. You always have to match that up against the risk of COVID, right? And so based on everything we know, and we can get into the risks of COVID for healthy individuals, healthy men such as you and I, John. We can get into, because I don't think it's just you get COVID and that's it. There may be some long-term consequences of getting COVID that are quite substantial, and we can get into that as well. But based on the risk reward, I think the benefits vastly outweigh the risks. Not even a question. Sure.
And obviously, like as you've probably seen, these drugs are also projected to be the most profitable injections to date as well. And in the previous coronaviruses, the animal tests and trials, they hadn't really succeeded. They hadn't really gotten the results they were looking after. And so why would it be different this time around when all the other animal trials for, it wasn't, SARS-CoV-2, but other coronaviruses have failed in terms of developing a vaccine for it?
Well, one thing is that SARS-CoV-1 is, so as you said, it's a different virus. The other thing is there wasn't as much incentive to make a medicine that works this way because SARS-CoV-1 just burned out. It didn't create a pandemic of this nature. And because it didn't create a pandemic of this nature, you didn't have as much incentive to make a technology that would fight this pandemic. Mm-hmm. Look, here's the thing, John, whenever you have a need for something, whenever there's a need that can be profitable, more scientists are going to be put to work on it, more technology is going to be put to work on it, and the probability that it's going to succeed is just going to be higher. Mm-hmm. And so when you mention you answered the question in your own question. You said it's the most profitable, one of the most profitable pharmaceuticals. Now, if that's true, it makes perfect sense why it would be efficacious, because so much work has been put into this thing to make it so profitable. And by the way, good. I'm glad that it's profitable. I'm glad that a pandemic fighter happens to be profitable. If it wasn't, the reason it's here, John, is because it's profitable. If it wasn't profitable, you wouldn't have it.
We haven't studied SARS-CoV-2 for that long, right? And so how can we be sure of the long-term concerns, especially when we take into consideration all the anecdotal evidence, which is not the greater form of evidence, and a lot of people dismiss that, such as the VAERS database and that kind of stuff. People are reporting a lot of issues, and so people are concerned because of that, due to the fact that the long-term data is lacking as well. And also, what kind of markers are being tested for potential side effects, right? Like what is being tested pre-injection, post-injection, to see if there is any, a potential inflammation in your cardiovascular system, et cetera. Mm-hmm. What is being done to track this thing?
So in terms of inflammation, we know there's going to be inflammation. The purpose, one of the entire premise of the vaccine is going to cause some sort of inflammation. There's going to be some interplay between the antigen and the immune cells that's going to release some cytokines. So if you're asking, well, are we checking to see if there's inflammation? Of course not. We know there's going to be inflammation. The entire purpose is to have some inflammation. That's part of the therapy. That's part of the prophylactic mechanism. But what we do look at is what has been looked at is symptoms pre and post. The data, screen sharing doesn't seem to be available, but the safety data that has been looked at, there were 2 vaccine recipients out of a total of 21,669 that passed away during the period of the study, 1 from atherosclerosis and 1 from cardiac arrest. 4 people in the placebo group died, 2 from unknown causes, 1 from a hemorrhagic stroke and 1 from a myocardial infarction. And no deaths were related to the vaccine placebo. So it's important to know here. So number one, you had 2 people die in the vaccine group and 4 people die in the control group. So is anything related to anything? Probably not. But if anything, there were more deaths. It is worth pointing out there were more deaths in the placebo group than the control group.
Right.
Double the deaths. Now, is that anything statistically significant? Probably not, because you're looking at 2 and 4. The numbers are so small, but if you want to get technical about it, the point estimate is actually going to be on the side favoring the vaccine for safety from the period of the randomized controlled trial. In terms of long-term safety follow-up, again, that question is going to apply to both the coronavirus and in terms of the vaccine itself. Based on our follow-ups data so far, we're not seeing anything that seems to be very concerning for long-term follow-up for neither Pfizer nor Moderna, especially in compared to the coronavirus itself. coronavirus itself, we're seeing that's something where we actually are seeing emerging long-term consequences coming up that actually are not just anecdotes that have been shown in cohort data, as well as having mechanistic support, and we can get into that as well. But that's actually something where we are seeing long-term safety issues. We are seeing it with getting COVID.
Right. Well, it's been a year, right? So it's not that long-term yet, right? So
it's been a little more in the year, but yeah. It's been since February last year. So we're almost at a year and a half.
Sure.
But that's enough. That's enough time to see. That's why we're seeing more and more things. But I'm just saying the things that we're seeing pop up are not on the vaccine side. The things that we are seeing pop up in terms of the longer term consequences, we're seeing them on the COVID side.
How do you think doctors can treat patients with COVID in the hospital, or even when testing positive, if they have not had the vaccine?
So a lot of drugs have been proposed. A lot of them have shown not to really work. So I'll tell you what has been shown to be somewhat promising and what has not been shown to be promising. Medications that have not been shown to be promising include ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine. Those medications have not been shown to be promising.
In what way?
In what way? In the sense, both in terms of mortality and in terms of morbidity, in terms of being able to get out of the hospital quicker, in terms of death. They just haven't been able to show.
What the data is. Let's just take hydroxychloroquine as an example. What data are you referring to right now?
I'm referring to multiple different randomized controlled trials that have been published, both using it as a prophylactic and in terms of a treatment in the hospital. So the best data, because some people with hydroxychloroquine, they say, well, it's not early enough. There's a randomized controlled trial that actually gave them at the earliest sign, in fact, even potentially before, they gave them hydroxychloroquine. No difference in terms of hospitalization, no difference in terms of the rate of getting COVID, no difference in terms of getting out of the hospital. Trial. This has been put to death. This has been the nails in the coffin of these medications have been just already nailed quite a while ago. Right. What has been shown to be more effective is there are certain monoclonal antibodies that have been developed, like bamlanivimab or whatnot, and there's some data indicating that they may be somewhat helpful, but it's tough. I mean, there still needs to be follow-up. And another thing that hasn't really been shown that was promising was convalescent plasma. So we had some high hopes for convalescent plasma, and that's the idea that, well, people who had COVID can donate their plasma and they have antibodies there. But it turns out that wasn't really very helpful. It didn't really pan out, and it didn't really help people who had COVID-19. Sure. So unfortunately, a lot of promising therapies that we hyped up and thought that they were good, it turns out they didn't really work, which is all the more reason to not get this virus in the first place.
Sure.
Right? If treatment after treatment has been not effective, and there may be some handful of treatments that have shown some promise in trials, but are very expensive and whatnot, and they're systemic, just don't get the virus.
Right. Well, let's, for example, let's talk about hydroxychloroquine. It's something that a lot of people patient or doctors, frontline doctors were using early on, right? In a lot of places in the US, many places around the world, even in combination with, I don't know, a ton of different.
Azithromycin. They used the combination with azithromycin. Yeah,
ivermectin, favipiravir, doxycycline, anti-malarial steroids, all kinds of stuff, right? Because it was there was no guidance, there was no consensus on how to deal with this. A lot of these doctors were, just trying whatever they could, right, to save lives. And a lot of doctors and clinics actually saw a lot of promising results with, let's use, hydroxychloroquine, right? Which you're saying is disproven by, a randomized control trial. Maybe you're talking about
multiple randomized controlled trials.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe
it's not only
the recovery trials or the solidarity trials, for example, right?
There's been more than that, but the not only has it been disproven, John, if anything, they were actually harming patients. So one thing that they were doing is they were giving hydroxychloroquine with azithromycin, and if you look at the results for those trials for that arm, they actually had a higher risk of dying.
Right.
Than
At
if
hospitalized
they got
patients, right?
Yeah. They had a higher risk. You had a higher, and they were, look, these doctors, and by the way, these are often the same doctors that will tell you how promising their results are. And this is why it's important to do a trial and not just listen to doctors saying they've seen these promising results. Because in reality, they were killing people.
Right.
In reality, they had good intentions. They're not bad people. They had great intentions, and they were just focusing on the patients that got better.
Right.
But in reality, they were just making it more likely for them to die.
Right. Well, in the trials, from what I've read as well, let's use Solidarity and the recovery trials, which were the main ones that got the FDA to retract the emergency approval, to use that as a treatment for COVID. They were using it in hospitalized patients, which was not supposed to happen, as it's an outpatient, like an early treatment, right? What they've been doing and seeing success with in clinics, it was for early treatment, not for hospitalized patients who are on their deathbed. And also they were giving doses that were completely, off the charts in terms of what they would normally use for other purposes that are shown to be effective in the last 50, 60 years of
well, there's been trials. Yeah, there's been trials that looked at it early on. There's been trials that looked at early COVID. There's been trials that looked at it as a prophylactic, the point being it's the earliest possible.
Right.
I don't recall the doses being off the chart, and they found the same thing. They found that it doesn't do anything.
Right. Yeah, apparently the doses were like 3 to 4 times higher than what they're supposed to be. So
I'm not aware of that being the case. I'm not aware of being the case in the outpatient doses. But either way, like, here's the thing, John. Like, you do the trial, and there's always something that'll be like, oh, well, you did this. Okay, well, no, it's not supposed to be in late stage. It's supposed to be with early COVID. Oh, okay, well, we'll do the trial with early COVID. Oh, well,
the dosage is a high dose.
Okay, well, wait, from which trial are you talking about?
The recovery and
the New England German. No. I'm talking about the New England Journal of Medicine paper from the hydroxychloroquine prophylactic.
The combination treatment. Yeah, I haven't seen that one.
Standard dose is around, like, it could be around 400 to 600 milligrams as a single dose, or in 2 divided doses per day. Then it's 200 milligrams a day or 400. These are standard doses for, like, general indications of Plaquenil or hydroxychloroquine. But that's what was done in a randomized controlled trial as pre-exposure, post-exposure prophylaxis. So what they did was they had individuals that were exposed to COVID, and when they were exposed to COVID, they gave them either placebo or hydroxychloroquine. They gave them 800 milligrams once, followed by 600 in 6 to 8 hours, then 600 daily for additional 4 days, which is not that high of a dose. It's slightly higher, but it's not that crazy. It's not like off the charts. And it did absolutely nothing.
Someone looks at the data and they look at the results, they look at the methodology, they look at everything, all the steps of the way, and you decide to, use that as truth, as fact, as the answers because of that. So that is,
okay. So to be clear, John, all right. So let me just be clear. What I'm saying, and here's what you don't have to have faith. What I'm saying is that you don't have to have faith to believe that the extent of what the data is, to the extent that it is such that the results, the conclusion that you're going to draw is going to be the same. So, for example, yes, the data might be, there might be an error in some site that they reported one event in another group rather than the first group. There might be some error in another site that balance that out, or so whatnot. The data might not be exactly the same, but the degree of how off it would have to be to make a huge difference like that you don't have to have faith, because you would have to believe in something absolutely astronomically improbable in order for it to be that way. So you don't have to believe that the data is exactly the way it is in order to draw this conclusion. There's a whole range of possibilities of how the data can be, and the probability of it being something that would change your conclusion on that data is so low that you would actually have to have faith to not accept the results of the data, actually.
Right. Well, the main idea here is just to be open-minded, right? To be critical of the data that is showing, especially when it's funneled so selectively through a handful of organizations, especially when you're just considering the Moderna and Pfizer trials, and on top of that, considering that the side effects that are coming up, although they're anecdotal and a lot of people want to throw it out as garbage, we're still seeing a lot of people, a lot of people who know people who've taken the shot who've had, severe consequences, although it's rare for sure, but it's not being shown in those randomized controlled trials. So there is like a contrast there, even in theirs, which is not an accurate reporting system whatsoever, I believe. It's still got, in the last, a couple of months, it's gotten more death reports than all the other injections of the traditional vaccines combined for the last 20 years, right? So it's still a huge spike in cases and reports, and a lot of people want to throw it out.
Yeah, but John, here's the thing. Like, yes, you should always have an open mind, but these are hypothesis generating things that should be put to the test in just like that randomized controlled trials. If you have those things, those anecdotes, and you do a randomized controlled trial and none of that pans out, then that supersedes the anecdotes. Right. This is true in any context. We don't change our epistemic rules just because it's a vaccine and people are spamming the VAERS report system with anything that they're putting together and what they think happened. So yes, we should be open-minded, but of course not to the point where our brains are on the floor.
Right, but don't you think we should consider, the possibility that there is more happening when all of a sudden, this reporting is exploded through the roof compared to any other time in history?
Of course, and that's why we should engage in randomized controlled trials or rigorous studies to see it. Right. And every time we do that, it doesn't pan out, and it shows that actually these things were not either coincidental, or they were actually from COVID and you were attributing to the vaccine or something, or that they were from something else, or by the way, made up. That's another thing people do with VAERS, by the way. They literally are political individuals who make spam accounts for the VAERS, and they make shit up. Not joking.
Right. Yeah, that's a possibility for sure. But the issue is then, when there are conflicts of interest, if the randomized controlled trials, the most well-studied trials and well-developed trials are from the companies themselves and are not independent with a very large variety of experts from all sorts of backgrounds, countries, etc. A lot of people end up asking questions if everyone is basing their opinion, their recommendations based on the Moderna or the Pfizer trials that will benefit them if they have a positive result, right?
John, this isn't just isn't this idea that all the studies have just been filtered through
the RCTs,
the pharmaceutical company. Yeah, the RCTs, but again, like that's the case with every pharmaceutical. Like, why do you have like this degree of skepticism when it comes to a vaccine and not with any other medication on the planet? Like like the degree to which
there's a lot of medications
would have to be off.
You'd have to agree that a lot of medicines, are shown to have promising results in randomized controlled trials, and then something horrible happens and they had to pull it off the market.
Actually, if you look at proportionally, it's a drop in the ocean. There's a list of drugs that are like that. No. Yes, it does happen, but the probability that it happens is very, very. Even in those cases, a lot of times the concerns turn out to not be reality. So yes, it is possible. It's always possible with any medication, but the degree to which the results would have to be off here are astronomical. You would have to, even if regardless of the RCT. And by the way, with the non-RCT studies, the observational studies, there are studies that look at these individuals that are not from the trials. They're not from Pfizer. They're not from Moderna. They find the same thing. It's
the same thing. Meaning,
meaning that they're very efficacious. Sometimes even more efficacious than they found in the trials, by the way. And they drastically improve morbidity and mortality.
Right.
So like at this point, you'd have to look, I mean, we're always, am I going to be open-minded if something new comes up? Of course. Like there's some, if new data comes on that is reliable, absolutely. At this point, based on the data available, these things, these things are just relegated to fairy tales. And maybe that'll change in the future, but right now it's fairy tale level.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people have unfortunately been censored or silenced, from doctors, virologists, epidemiologists, political figures, people in China to do with the lab origin, that kind of stuff, right? There's a lot of silencing going on, which again enforces and encourages more of these theories and more doubts, which is understandable, right? But there's a reason why.
I agree with you there. This is where we agree.
Yeah,
this is where we agree, because I think that, so just to be clear, I think that yes, it is happening where people are being silenced, and I understand why they're being silenced, because it's such a health hazard to stop people from getting this vaccine. However, well. I think the best approach, I think the best approach, it's objective that it is a health hazard to stop people from getting this vaccine. That's not subjective. But my subjective view is that I think it's probably going to be better to not censor them. And instead of censoring them, what we really need is people who actually are familiar with the research and how research is done.
Yeah.
And we need them to debate these people. We need to, and that's what I do. I debate anti-vaxxers and I stomp them. Right. I mean, I'm not just trying to be like here's and by the way, for any of your viewers, if anyone wants to debate me on this topic, have at it.
Preferably a doctor or someone qualified.
Bring them on. I'll debate any doctor you want. I'll debate whoever wants to step up to the plate. Happy to debate them, happy to stop them. Because that's what we need, rather than censor them. What we need is people who are informed about this to debate them in a public format, so that they can look like a clown when they bring their anti-vax nonsense to someone who actually is familiar with their arguments and knows why they're nonsense.
Okay. That's very confident.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, it's not hard to be confident when you have so much of the reality on your side and the other side is at the level of a conspiracy theory. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when it comes down to conspiracy theories, like there's always going to be a lot of them. However, there's always conspiracy theories that are going to be proven to be true in the end. Like, for example, I personally believe that it will be proven if it's allowed to, that the virus leaked from a lab. Like, I believe that will happen for sure eventually. But that's been something that's been censored, been banned. It's been people have been deleted from social media for saying that, for raising questions, for having people who worked in these facilities who are from China and have a lot of good evidence.
Real quick, when I say conspiracy theory, I'm not just talking about. I'm talking about the type of conspiracy theory that a person with a tinfoil hat would say, right? I'm talking about. Right. I'm talking about the person with a tinfoil hat that said they saw the UFO last night, right? I'm not talking about like some communist.
What if the Pentagon? What if the Pentagon says the UFOs are real?
Look, if they then they have to provide evidence. Same standard as I hold everyone to. If you want to say something, provide evidence. Doesn't matter what the organization is.
Sure.
So that's the kind of conspiracy theory I'm talking about. I'm not talking about like some kind of communist regime trying to hide.
You have to be convinced by the evidence, though.
Yeah, of course. I have to be convinced by the evidence, just like anything else.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that it's actually true, even if you're convinced of the evidence they provide. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's actual.
No, it doesn't. No, nothing's perfect, but logic and reason and empirical evidence is the best tools that we have to go by.
What is your thoughts on mandatory vaccines? Mandatory vaccination for COVID?
My thoughts on that? Okay, so that's a complicated ethical topic. It depends. Like, if there is, look, at some point, it depends on what the facts of the situation are. So let's just say hypothetically, there's a certain amount of extra individuals that are going to die if you mandate vaccines compared to non-mandating vaccines. At some threshold, I'm going to say, yes, you should mandate vaccines. If like you scale up the amount of deaths on the other side, if the scale the amount of deaths who are going, if these individuals would die if you did not mandate vaccines compared to if you did mandate vaccines. At some threshold of death, I'm going to say, yes, you should mandate vaccines. Of course, not to those who are allergic or et cetera, or will have some type of, we believe will have some type of reaction.
Yeah.
But
I mean, to
at
the
some point, I'm going to
numbers,
say yes.
to our current numbers.
To the current, to our current numbers.
Let's say it's a, I don't know, 0.3 mortality rate or something like that, or 1%.
Well, average total is going to be around 0.5. But yeah, I think so. I have to think about it a little more, but I lean towards mandatory. Yeah.
The way I see it is that I believe that these shots are potentially going to be, more not dangerous, but they're going to have more likelihood of some sort of side effect, potentially long term, that we have no idea about. So, and just because of that, just because of the reasoning behind not having the long-term data, not understanding, the effects of the shot long-term and the complications, that is, for me personally, enough reason not to mandate or force people to take something that they're personally unsure of. And even if their doctors or the health organizations say it is safe, if the data is missing, it's, likely, it's in your right to decide, in my opinion, whether or not you want to take that, risk, if you believe it is a risk. Now, even if you,
again, why is that concern? Why is the long-term concern there for the vaccine, but not there for COVID?
Well, people prefer to, a lot of people, I think vegans as well, prefer to, rely on their immune system and that kind of stuff, right? You've heard that a lot throughout the pandemic. People want to, be out in the sunshine, crazy. Have enough vitamin D, boost their immune systems, and naturally through nutrition, lifestyle methods. And they want to take that risk with COVID, but they don't want to take that risk with a pharmaceutical because they're against maybe the ethical methods of the pharmaceutical industries. Maybe they've seen what these pharmaceutical industries have done in the past, what kind of
I just want to see if there's a good argument. I just want to see if there's a good argument to be concerned about long-term effects of the vaccine, but not long-term effects of COVID, especially since we're having all these longer-term effects come up with COVID, but not nearly as much with the vaccine.
A more developed, immunity to the strain or the virus as well is a reason why a lot of people do it.
So I'm actually not convinced of that. I think it may be the opposite.
I think so.
Now I know that antibodies is not just the end all be all, but I can tell you that people who get the vaccine have way higher on it, because I'm actually involved in a research project that looks at this. People who get vaccines have generally higher antibody levels against COVID than those who have gotten COVID. They tend to have the antibodies on the lower side. Now, I know it's not all about antibodies, it's about T-cell mediated function, but T-cell mediated function is enhanced by the vaccine as well. So I'm not sure it's the case that you have better immunity to COVID. Actually, if I had to gun to the head, if I had to pick one, I think you actually have worse immunity getting it naturally than with the vaccine. But they're not mutually exclusive. Me personally, I had COVID, and I also got the vaccine. And my antibodies against COVID are off the charts now.
You had COVID naturally, and then you got the vaccine on top of it?
Yep. I had COVID naturally, and I got the vaccine on top of it.
Just to increase your antibody count?
And
and because you're a doctor,
it's effectively a doctor. But my antibody count after I got COVID was actually on the lower side. The antibodies against, and I had a real case of it. I was out for 10 days. It was not fun.
We got to get you out in the sun.
But that was the sun. If you just have the sunlight, then I don't know why. I mean, I know your meaning, but the point being is that after I got the vaccine, my antibody levels just shot up. Like there may be this synergistic effect, and I see that too. A lot of people get COVID and get the vaccine; they really have very high antibody levels against COVID. But yeah, I'm not convinced that based on the data I've seen that.
What about the cases where people get reinfected after vaccination, for example?
There are cases there are also cases who people get reinfected after COVID. There are breakthrough cases on both.
Based on PCR tests, right?
They're very rare. Yeah, based on PCR tests. They're rare, very rare, but they happen. They happen in both cases. So again, I'm not convinced that a breakthrough case is more likely if you get natural immunity versus if you get synthetic immunity.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, I do understand and I do support people's skepticism when it comes down to all these, political affiliations and industrial motivations and that kind of stuff. I completely understand. Just like in the vegan community, people are very skeptical towards the dairy industry, the meat industry, funding nutrition science and that kind of stuff, right? So I understand.
John, the problem is not the skepticism. That's not my problem. The problem is not, I don't have a problem with people being skeptical. I have a problem with people applying their skepticism inconsistently. And that's what I see. And that's what I see in a lot of times happening. Okay. They have a standard of skepticism that they're applying to the vaccine that is incredibly high. And then when it comes to everything else, their standard of skepticism is just lower. And I want to know what justifies the higher level of skepticism from an epistemic standpoint in the vaccine, but not from every other thing. That's the issue. The issue, I'm happy with people being skeptical. Right. What I think is really weird and cringy is when people max out the skepticism to a ridiculous level just in one area specifically.
Yeah, I can agree.
And that tells me people are just acting like ideologues.
Right. Yeah, I can fully get that. But since you support skepticism or you think it's a natural thing and, something that people, would have, wouldn't you be in favor of people making their own minds up in terms of who, if they want to get a vaccine or not in order to,
That depends.
Okay.
Yeah, that depends on what's going to happen. If look, all things being equal, I would love that. All things being equal, I want people to be able to make their own choices. Now, when it happens where there's enough bodies on the other end of the coin, when you let people make their own decision, at some point I'm going to say, no, you know what? I don't care about your own decision.
Right.
These amount of bodies are going to be worth more than your decision. That's going to be true for driving. That's going to be true for everything. Now, I don't think driving reaches that level. I don't think smoking reaches that level. But if it did reach that level, if smoking, for example, if smoke was able to replicate in other people's lungs and then pass from one lung to another in an exponential fashion, and then all these people were dying because some idiot just decided that it was their personal choice and freedom to smoke, I would tell them, I don't care. You know what? I don't care. You want your choice? Guess what? It's not worth the rest of the people dying for it.
Right. But at this point right now, with let's say a 0.5% mortality rate, what is your stance on mandatory vaccination?
Yeah, I think that's higher. I think that's higher than it's higher than car crashes. It's higher than smoking. It's higher than all these other things. Now in the short term, but not in the long term, right? People are going to be driving their cars for the rest of it. We don't know in the long term. Maybe in the long term, when it goes down, we can make the choice again. Maybe in the long term, if it goes, look, you could always change the policy, right?
Well, it's too late if you've already had the vaccine, right?
Well, no, you could always, no, I'm saying you could change it for like future children and whatnot. Like it's not too late. There are going to be individuals who are not going to get it. But the point is that even in the short term, well, we don't know what's going to happen long term. It could be worse in the long term. Who knows? There could be another variant that comes out. I don't know. Neither do you. Neither does anyone. But the point is, like, the principle is the same. The principle is just that at a certain point, and that point is different for different people. But at a certain point, your freedoms are not worth other people's graves. Okay? Other people being put in the grave. They're just not. I'm sorry. And I would tell them to, like, okay, I hear you. Too bad. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I would agree with you 100%. If the mortality rate was a lot higher, if this was something that was going to be around forever, the data was there, yeah, for sure. Have you seen any information or studies where the injection, the spike protein ends up being created in many other places rather than only in the area of the injection, the muscle tissue in the shoulder, for example?
For like, in terms of for like months follow-up? No, I have never seen anything like that.
Oh, you haven't? Okay.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. I haven't seen for like months after. No.
Okay. And even if it's a couple of days, weeks, or something like that, do you think there is no?
Oh, I'm sure it's there in a day. I'm sure it's there in a couple of days.
But why do you think that's
the whole point?
it ends up in the brain or your bone marrow, ovary.
Oh no, I haven't seen I haven't seen anything like that.
Okay. Yeah,
I haven't seen it in the brain or the bone marrow ovaries or anything like that. Yeah, no, I haven't.
I've seen
by the way, I just have to mention again.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, but what I have seen, even if there are, you do find some spike proteins in these different tissues. With COVID, you have the whole virus there.
Mm-hmm.
You have the whole viron. That's not just the spike protein. You have the whole virus.
Mm-hmm.
So like whatever amount of concern, and you have it, not only do you have it, you have the whole virus there 7 months plus after you got it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're not just talking about a couple days.
Right.
So like whatever concern we may have, and I'd be interested in seeing the proteins, whatever concern we may have, what I haven't seen is I haven't seen A, the spike proteins there months after, and
Mm-hmm.
B, I haven't seen a whole virus there after. But I guess what? You see that with COVID.
Right. Which you can still get after the injection. Potentially.
Incredibly. Okay, John, that's like so, okay. The odds of breakthrough cases like that?
Yeah, well,
you're talking about less than like 1/10 of 1%. It's just,
yeah, well, it was
incredibly rare.
It was on the news somewhere. That was a town or a city in the UK where most of the deaths and cases were from people who were vaccinated, and that's not scientific data, but it's something to look into as well.
I would love to take a look at that, because a lot of times when they look, every time I look at one of these things, it turns out to be nonsense. But I'm happy to take a look at it.
My final question: when it comes to diagnosing COVID, do you think there is any chance that the PCR test may be ineffective?
It depends what you mean by ineffective. So in tests, you always have
in terms of figuring out, not finding the viral matter in itself, but determining whether or not a person is infectious.
So that also depends in terms of what you mean by effective. So with every test, there's something called a
right.
Yeah, no, I understand. Okay. But determining whether you're infectious is not like a binary thing. Like it's a probability scale of transmission. Right. So it's a function of the viral load. So if you have a higher viral load, particularly in the nasal area, then you're going to have a higher rate of transmitting COVID to other people. By the way, new data has come out showing that the vaccines actually reduce transmission rates by 50% or more, because even when you do acquire the virus, even if you don't get COVID and have it, you have less viral load.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you're transmissible or not, whether you're infectious or not, isn't a yes or no answer. It's a percentage. What percentage are you likely to transmit this virus to someone else? Mm-hmm. It's the scale. Now, that's just the point. In terms of PCR testing, it's just going to look at, you're going to have some type of test that looks at a viral load to do that. That's going to be a much more expensive test. I'm not sure if we have anything like that, rather than some just threshold saying you have it or you don't have it. I don't know if we have a test that looks at infectivity, but what we can do is there's been studies looking at rates of the transmission, and they find that they're lower by sometimes over 50%.
Right.
When you do get the vaccine compared to when you don't.
Yeah. Well, I've seen, I think it was a study comparing the CT or the cycles to the infectious. Mm-hmm. So, the lower the cycles, the more infectious you're going to be. The higher the cycles used, the less infectious you'll be, because, you have a very small amount of it in your system. But everyone's being tested at 30, 35 cycles, so the data is kind of hard to sort out there. Maybe to be on the safe side. It's
always a balance. Yeah, it's always a balance between something called sensitivity and specificity. Mm-hmm. So the test, that's a topic for a different time. But the point is that anytime you're designing a test, you have to balance out the you're going to have some false positives and false negatives. You're going to have to balance them out. Yeah. And ultimately it's going to come down into sensitivity and specificity. That's a whole different complicated discussion.
Yeah.
But the point is, at the end of the day, getting the vaccine makes you less infectious.